Welcome back. Hope you're ready for some more High on History with me. I'm your host, Harrison Schultz. And so tonight we're going to cover the second half of the lecture we started about a month ago already. We were talking about the rise of capitalism in Amsterdam. You can check it out on YouTube right here. And we were talking about the rise of colonialism in Amsterdam as well due to the Public Bank of Amsterdam. And before we do that though, obviously these lectures take a lot of work. I put a lot of time into researching and studying this stuff so I can share it with the public because this stuff needs to be shared. My partner Natalie, behind the camera there, she puts up with a lot. She puts a lot of her time, invests a lot of energy into this as well. And we need you to help keep these lectures going. We got a long way to go. We've still got 15 chapters left of this book, and frankly, the best is yet to come. We're going to get to the United States history in a couple chapters, and that's when everyone's going to have more of a frame of reference for this material. And that's when the conversation is going to get more interesting. But
William George is with us too. He says hello.
Will, thanks for joining us as always. Please add to my lectures in the side comments there as much as you can. And so obviously we've got a long way to go. We need your help. We've got electricity bills to pay. I need food. I am a struggling, starving graduate student. My graduate studies are nearly finished. I defended my dissertation. I finally finished editing it. It should be up online for me to share with you all soon. I'm really looking forward to that. And now that I'm done with that, I'm transitioning into a new project that I want you all to help me fund. And it's going to be a much simpler project, a much shorter broadcasts. And I want to focus on monetary news, so focusing specifically on news pertaining to the Federal Reserve and how that's affecting markets and so forth like that. Increasing monetary literacy in terms of our regular news cycles. These lectures have been great. These have been a joy to do. I really love this history, and I hope you're all enjoying it too. But it's obviously a pretty high barrier to entry. This is the backbone of the movement. It's not necessarily a springboard for a lot of people to jump onto the movement. But this new news series that I want to do will refer to these lectures very often. You know, when we're talking about other things that are happening, we'll be referring to historical precedents that we're covering in these lectures right now. And that's going to be really obvious tonight when we talk about the rise of the first contemporary stock exchange in Amsterdam, because this is the same sort of stock exchange that ours is modeled on. And so we're going to talk about a lot of similar things happening in Amsterdam in the 1600s that are happening right now, and that happened with the fall or the collapse of the stock market in 2007.
You have someone from Santa Barbara saying hello. His name is Michael Montenegro.
Oh, Michael, dude, what's up, man? Big shout out to you. It's been a long time since I've been. This is even bigger.
Yeah, and someone's asking if that's a book in your lap, The Lost Science of Money. Warren Chamberlain is asking.
Warren, yes, this is the book, Lost Science of Money. This is what we're working on tonight, and we're covering the second half of Chapter 9. So I'm not going to cover the whole book, but before I do this, again, if you can donate, please donate. We've got bigger plans. This is going to get public. We need to get me back on TV again so that I can promote the NEED Act. And obviously, I'm not just asking this for the sake of having an interesting conversation. We actually have a monetary solution that will get all of us paid in the long run. There is money for all of us at the end of this tunnel. And you can read more about the solution on greensformonetaryreform.org. This page covers the basics of the NEED Act. Please read HR 2990 online as well. This is going to get all of us out of debt. If you got hospital debt, credit card debt, housing debt, student debt, predatory debt, whatever, this is going to get rid of that. This is going to set up universal healthcare, universal education, create jobs, invest in green new energy projects, so forth. This is going to revitalize our economy so that none of us has to worry about money again. Universal basic guaranteed income will be a part of this as well. So please study the solution on greensformonetaryreform.org. And you can donate. Please donate as much or as little as you can. If you can't, please at least share this lecture and share the GoFundMe page. So with that, let's sort of dive back into what we covered in the last lecture. Again, you can check it out on YouTube, Greens for Monetary Reform on YouTube as well. But just to kind of breeze through the rise of capitalism in Amsterdam, before we do that, let's just review the primary themes of The Lost Science of Money by Stephen Zarlenga, God rest his soul. This is about the primary importance of money, power, and how money is created. The nature of how money is created has purposely been kept censored, secret, confused, and like Zarlenga talks about, you can find detailed records of how the garbage was collected in ancient Athens, but search in vain to find out how the coinage operated. And so how society defines money determines who controls money. If you define money as a commodity, as gold, that made it easier for priests to control money back in ancient Greece, for example. And as Zarlenga points out in this book, the battle for control over this money between different sectors, between governments, kings, and bankers, be they priest bankers like they were back in ancient times, modern bankers like now, this battle over private and public control over money is really what gives shape to Western civilization since ancient Greece up until now. So, Amsterdam. If you want to check out the full review of the book, you can check out the last lecture we did. I covered pretty much everything in there, from the origin of monetary systems up through the rise of capitalism in Amsterdam. And so, the capitalism in Amsterdam was first off based on real industry at first, and we see the same thing happening in Greece, Rome, off to Constantinople, then to Venice, and then off onto Antwerp eventually, and now up into Amsterdam. Forgive me if I skipped a few important stops on that journey. But it's the same pattern. Usually we see the rise of these great empires based on some sort of successful, actual, real industry, like fishing in this case, or agriculture and others. Dutch Zaandam was also a big warehousing center. Ships were being built there, so shipping, fishing, warehousing, storing products, real economy is what got the party started in Amsterdam. A lot of grain and wood were traded for wine and salt. Prior to 1585, there was no bank. The Burger class was prosperous, but there was no conspicuously wealthy class. 1609, the Municipal Bank of Amsterdam is created. This is the only one that was allowed to operate. All others were forbidden to engage in banking. And this public bank came from Sevilla and Venice. This public bank worked really well. There's aspects of this public bank that we are seeking to preserve with the Need Act. Indeed, we want the Federal Reserve to be a publicly accountable bank. And there's plans for nationalizing it laid out in H.R. 2990 of 112th Congress. So the purpose of the Bank of Amsterdam was not to be a bank of issue. It wasn't a lending bank. It was to stabilize the monetary system, which, of course, was based on silver and gold. And there was a lot of instability caused by different mints, and of course, cutting little chunks out of these coins and melting it into other coins was a big problem. So the actual value of the coin would slowly decrease. Money changing practices were problems too. There's all kinds of problems. So the Bank of Amsterdam was created to stabilize this. The bank didn't do interest. It didn't pay interest. It didn't do overdrafting, like a lot of us have to deal with. Loans. The main thing that it did is created a uniform currency. It created a form of bank money. So coins, gold and silver coins, were taken as deposits, And then credits, or known bank money, the agio, were issued against these deposits so that people would walk around Amsterdam and carry out business in Amsterdam with the agio, with this bank money that they created. This was a uniform currency. And this agio actually traded at a premium over gold and silver. This bank money became more valuable for a while. Lots more details here to it, but we gotta move forward here. So they would also move sums of money within the bank from creditor to debitors. This is known as a giro banking operation. And this service was so popular that the withdrawal of deposits from the banks was very rare. Merchants in Amsterdam would just move money around within the bank without actually necessarily trading it, and then they'd use this giro for practical kind of things. So, the city of Amsterdam required that all bills drawn upon and negotiated in Amsterdam in the amount of 600 guilders or more must be paid in bank money. This made sure that merchants kept an account at the bank, and this created a demand for bank money. Strictly opposite the bank, it was backed 100% by specie. That wouldn't be the case with our Federal Reserve. But it had free transfer between accounts, which we don't even enjoy really. This safeguarded banks' money from theft, of course. There's a slight charge for changing money. But the bank's reputation was another invitation for people to come and lodge that part of their money they could transport and knew no means of securing at home. Nor did only those people lodge monies there who came over in the country, but many more who never left their own, though they provided for a retreat or against storm, and though no place is secure, nor from when they might easily draw their money into any other part of the world. So this banking operation was very successful. People really liked it. The problem started happening, though, because the bank was issuing secret credit. It wasn't supposed to be doing this, but it started issuing credit to the world's first evil corporation, the Dutch East India Company, which was constantly short of cash. And so the public bank started financing this private evil corporation, which set up slavery. We're going to talk about that. So, during 1780, during the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, English-Dutch War, which we'll cover at the end, this really caused the bank to go broke, which we find always. Wars put extreme pressures on a country's finances. And so by 1781, neither could repay. So then by 1790, people were starting asking for gold and silver coinage again instead of this bank money. So the bank was starting to break. 1794, the bank resumed paying out coinage on demand for the first time since the early 1700s, but redemption had to stop after a few weeks because they didn't have enough gold and silver to pay out. So eventually, by 1814, King William of Holland funds Bank of Issue on Bank of England model, Bank of the Netherlands. So they have a new bank, a new private bank, similar to the Bank of England. And the Bank of Amsterdam, the public bank, is dissolved by 1820. It was a good bank, but it got involved in this secret metals trade, which was a big problem, trading silver for gold in the East, which we cover in all the other lectures. Zarlinga talks about how this is a major mechanism, almost a battery for history. Venice was doing this before Amsterdam, of course. And so by getting into gold, Amsterdam loses sovereignty over the base of this bank in foreign speculation. And this resulted to metal being sold to the mint at increasingly higher prices. And of course, silver was taken back to East. You could get more gold in exchange for your silver in the East than you could in the West. And so merchants would bring gold to the East to trade for more silver to take back as well. It's almost like countries keeping currency rates unequal deliberately in order to make money off currency exchanges. I think that's enough of that to cover for now. The other thing that taxed the Dutch, Amsterdam, the other thing that contributed to the fall of Amsterdam was colonialism, empire building. Same way we see Greece, like Sparta, or Rome, eventually Venice. As soon as they try to create an empire, as soon as they stop focusing on their own issues, and as soon as they try to start subjugating other people in other lands, that's when things domestically start to disintegrate. So, Dutch East India Company, of course, was all over the Americas and Africa and Asia. This is from Dutch Batavia in the 17th century. It's now North Jakarta. And of course, the Dutch East India Company was the Atlantic slave trade in Brazil, the Caribbean, and North America. So the Atlantic slave traders ordered by trade volume were the Portuguese, the British, the French, and the Spanish, the Dutch, and lastly the Americans. And they had established outposts on the African coast where they purchased slaves from local tribal leaders. Current estimates are about 12 million were shipped across the Atlantic, although the actual number purchased by the traders is considerably higher, meaning a lot of people never made it, of course. We also talked about the Jewish question and the roles that Jews played in the banking rise of Amsterdam, and indeed, which helps give us a few clues to the current Jewish question. There's a clip, Jordan Peterson was just talking about the Jews as well too, and he was talking about it in terms of IQ. He was talking about how Jews are competent, and that's why they're kind of overrepresented. They have higher IQ scores and tests, stuff like that. Interesting discussion. I mean, the Jewish question, obviously Marx wrote about it as well. We covered that in the last lecture. The main thing to talk about here is that this is not a Jewish conspiracy. We talked about how a lot of this started with persecution. The Inquisition scattered Jews all across Europe, and so Jews had a lot of connections, and they were able to use these connections to move goods and money around. They were runners. Marx sort of talks about the Jew wandering around, without a community. And of course, the majority of the financiers were Protestants. The people putting up the money were Protestants who were making money out of bank loans, out of nothing. And the Jews were the ones who were running it around, essentially. Holland was a strong hold of Protestantism, and the church no longer dictated commercial policies, unlike the Catholic Church, which had a ban on usury, which John Calvin effectively finished. And so many Jews were traders with international connections. So the reason why the reason why there's a lot of anti-Semitism connected with this Federal Reserve issue isn't because of a Jewish conspiracy. It's because of an unholy Protestant-Jewish alliance. It's Protestants making money up and Jews running it around. Long story short, this is pretty much what I'm seeing here. So, finally getting to the meat of the lecture. Pretty much sets us up to talk about the first Amsterdam Stock Exchange, which was set up in 1611. It was modeled on that of Antwerp in 1531, which is said to have gotten it from the Middle East. And Amsterdam Stock Exchange was built in 1611. Commodities as well as stocks were traded, with specific areas or pits designated for trading in different items. Amsterdam from 1600s onward was a direct origin of our present exchange mechanisms and procedures. In the 1980s and 90s, attention often focused on innovations known as derivative products. And all these products from the 1980s and 1990s, like stock market indices, futures, and options contracts, were in use on the Great Amsterdam Stock Exchange in the 1600s and 1700s. You find the same type of contracts, same general rules of trading, the same methods of cheating the public and manipulating markets. So the Amsterdam Stock Exchange offered many types of different transactions. Stocks sold for immediate cash, so you could just sell stock for cash. You can do that today too. Stocks sold up to margin for 80%. What's margin? Margin's another word for credit. It's another word for debt. So today, I believe, according to Investopedia, margin can only be loaned up to 50% of whatever you have in your margin account. So this 80% creates a lot more room for credit risks, for bubbles to happen, for you to invest money that you don't have. So you also see monthly settlement dates on the 20th of the month, with payment due at the 25th back in Amsterdam. Monthly settlement date, of course, this is the date when the trade is final. This is when the buyer actually has to make a payment and it's finalized. Nowadays, it's usually 2 days after the execution date, the final settlement date. And settlements used to be confirmed by physical delivery, but now this can be electronic. So the elapsed time between transaction and settlement exposes both parties to credit risks, especially when you're dealing with foreign transactions. So monthly settlement dates, again, you can just see how this is stacking up. You know, another potential for credit risks. So we also see future settlement dates entirely. We also see put and call options, which are very important, which we see nowadays as well. And premiums, the money you would pay to get these put and call options, would pay immediately at the Bank of Amsterdam. So put and call options allow an investor to speculate into an area that they don't, into stocks that they don't have, or to hedge an investment. So a put option is a contract which gives the right to sell a stock or an underlying security at a certain price at a certain future date, but not necessarily the obligation to, so you can sell it. A call option gives the holder a right to buy a stock or an underlying security at a certain price at a future date without obligation. And so the other interesting thing that we see back then that was unique to them was the duck to tune, and this was an imaginary share representing 1/10 of a Dutch East India Company share with monthly settlement dates. So, completely imaginary form of value that was being created right at the stock exchange. And the stock exchange set up right, kind of almost makeshift, it seems. The Amsterdam Beurs shows the nature and scope of this worldwide economy. Each of the many pillars around Neville's court represents the meeting place of a particular group of merchants. The Russian merchants congregating one pillar, with the Middle Eastern traders around the next, East Indian merchants around the third, and so on, while in the open court, the brokers and financiers haggle over the day's share quotations. The Amsterdam Beurs was the hub of a gigantic network of world trade, shipping, and finance. Official brokers were sworn. There were 375 Christians and 20 Jews. They could not trade on their own account. There were 700 unsworn brokers, mainly Jewish, and they were not prohibited from trading on their own account. So, again, we sort of see this official market and this unofficial market. Agreements on trades were signaled by handshakes or by hand clasps. Trading in various items could be extremely thin or very hectic. During speculative periods, feverish buying and selling and gambling were continued until 4 o'clock in the morning in the French coffee house adjacent to the exchange, wrote historian Charles Wilson. So, the primary security, the primary stock sold on the exchange were trades of the Dutch East India Company, the DEIC. This was the first company to issue stock to the public. And this was capitalized at 6.4 million florins, which was over 64 tons of gold. In the first 6 years, the DEIC paid a dividend of 25 to 30% a year. Then in 1612, it paid 57, in 1613, 42. So, the 1607 share price of the stock rose to 100% over the original par value. The 1688 rose up to 580%. So this stock was extremely valuable. The company was composed of 6 chambers representing the corporation, originally merged to form it. The DEIC shares were registered and traded in their 6 separate cities. Though the shares and dividends were identical, shares registered in one city could not be traded or delivered in another city. Over half the shares were registered in Amsterdam. Once the market got going, the Amsterdam shares traded at a large premium over the other cities, 30 to 60% higher for the same company. Interesting that these shares became more valuable in other cities. So, by 1609, the shares started falling. They rose by 1607 to over 100% of the original value, but by 1609, they started to fall from that level down to only 30% of the value. And the blame for this drop was placed on short selling tactics. And this got so bad that in 1610 laws were passed against short selling. We see a lot of controversy over short selling in our day and age. So, short selling's a little complicated. This is what I'm totally new to the market. So if anyone out there watching can jump in on the comment section and contribute to this conversation, it would be greatly appreciated. I'm learning this stuff as I go along as well. I'm teaching myself financial literacy as we move along. But short selling is how you make money off a stock as the stock's going down. So basically, a broker will borrow a stock from an investor and sell it on the market, make some money. And they'll do this knowing that the price is probably going to go down. And so they'll hold on to that money. It's not all their money because they still have a second part to the sale. They still have to buy that stock back and pay the owner back for what they borrowed. So they sell it, and then when the price goes down, they'll use that money that they earned off selling that stock to buy the same stock back at a lower price, and then that broker pays the investor back and keeps the difference as the profit. So try to find a better example here. AC at $10 per share. After a period of time, the stock declines to $5. At this point, you use that money you made when it was at $10 to buy it back. Your gross profit on this short sale is thus $500. $10 minus $5, 5 times 100 shares. And then your net profit will be lower owing to the costs involved with short selling. Premiums, commissions. Premium being the fee you pay to do a short sale. So, this is dangerous though if the stock doesn't go down. If the stock goes up, then the broker or the short seller will actually lose money. So, the major risk of short selling essentially is the fear of infinite losses. Well, the maximum loss for a long investor is the amount invested, blah, blah, blah. The maximum loss for a short seller is theoretically infinite, since there's no upper limit to a stock's price appreciation, to how high a stock can go. So this is risky business, basically. And just to give you an example of a short sale, would be from George Soros, famous 1%er, who funds things like MoveOn.org and Normal, apparently. I believe he funds a little bit of sovereign currency activism, a group called INET out in the UK. We wanted to fund a Positive Money chapter here, but September 16th, 1992, the day that speculators call Black Wednesday in Britain, and this was the day that George Soros broke the pound in England by using short selling tactics, by betting against it. And this is a really interesting article from Investopedia, which talks about how there's a lot of inflation, and the pound was basically losing its value due to this inflation. And so, while Britain was up against interest rates to attract people to the pound, George Soros started shorting the currency, and the British government gave in and withdrew. It became clear it was losing billions trying to buoy an artificial currency. So, interesting stuff. Another important article is this on Investopedia, A Brief History of Short Selling. Why is it still legal? So, short selling was a central issue for a long time, and the SEC, Security and Exchange Commission, prohibited it in 1937 with the Rule 10-A1, also known as the uptick rule, which states that market participants could legally sell short shares of stock only if it occurred on a price uptick from the previous sale. Short sales on downticks, with some narrow exceptions, were forbidden. This rule prevented short selling at successively lower prices, a strategy intended to artificially drive the stock price down. The uptick rule allowed unrestricted short selling when the market was moving up, increasing liquidity and acting as a check on upside price swings. So, 2000 did this rule, and of course the recession happened in 2008, and the SEC then instituted an alternative uptick rule that triggers when securities price falls 10% or more from the previous close, so it sets a limit on how far down this can go. It's important also to know that short selling is illegal in other countries. In 2007 and 2008, Australia, Canada, and several European nations banned short selling altogether. Some have since lifted the bans, but the United States definitely has the most liberal short selling laws, and you can tell this is probably a big part of it. Another interesting example of short selling, there's a movie called The Big Short from 2015. A lot of big names like Brad Pitt, Christian Bale, Ryan Gosling are in it. And I checked out some clips from it. It's pretty funny. But it talks about how some brokers, I believe, started betting against these credit default, the CDOs, credit collateralized debt obligations, which received AAA ratings, where obviously these CDOs, these home loans that homeowners couldn't afford to pay back. So this movie is about some investors who make a lot of money off shorting the United States economy. It's pretty funny, and it's kind of a good breakdown. It's a good way to kind of understand some of this stuff. One of the criticisms, though, actually pointed out by Investopedia, is that the film failed to fully acknowledge the role that the Federal Reserve played in allowing the crisis to continue. So, check out The Big Short, and that's why short selling is this is all just to say that short selling is still very much a problem today. It's leading to the collapse. It's led to the collapse of our economy in 2007. It's more than likely going to lead to the collapse of our economy again, and it led to the collapse of Amsterdam's economy. So, short selling continued to be a problem, and in 1687, the lawyer Nicholas Mies van Holtz wrote a book condemning it and asserting that Jewish brokers were playing a large part in the speculation. This was especially connected to the Doctoon shares, and the problem was considered serious enough for Stadtholder Frederick Henry to pass a law that excused the buyer of a contract that had been sold short to him from responsibility for any loss on trade. Trading law of the exchange of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange reads like present-day descriptions. There were bulls and bears, and of course, bulls are people who believe that the stock price will go up. Bears believe that the stock will go down. And there's also butterflies who kind of flutter between bullish and bearish. And so I'm going to put some of the trading rules from the 1600 that could be found in the guidelines that clearinghouses hand out to floor traders. So take every gain without showing remorse about missed profits. Never give anyone advice to buy or sell shares. Whoever wishes to win in this game must have patience and money. The expectation of event creates a much deeper impression upon the exchange than the event itself. So, pretty cutthroat stuff. Zarlenga talks about how the public got cheated. As with today's exchange, cheating was an indispensable part of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange activity, and as today, it occurred on 3 levels. Brokers would abuse clients' orders, there was behind-the-scenes manipulation of prices, and there was structural faults within market mechanisms specifically designed to fleece participants. So the brokers, or the deal makers, the people who connect the buyers and the sellers, they would definitely abuse their clients' or investors' orders. There were 2 types of brokers on the stock exchange: officially sworn-in brokers. There's 375 Christians and 20 Jews, but there are more than 700 unsworn brokers or free brokers who were mainly Jewish. The fee brokers were somewhat wild and not prescribed by law from certain practices that took advantage of clients. In particular, sworn brokers were forbidden to engage in dual trading. This means they were to execute orders for their clients' accounts and were not to trade for their own accounts. The free brokers traded their own accounts as well and would front-run their clients' orders as well as others that they could see entering the pit through sworn brokers. So dual trading, educate me, but this is essentially when you know about something that will influence the price of the stock and you put some money down on it before your client does. When you're supposed to be making a deal for your client, you're making a deal for yourself instead. Dual trading was an important issue in the commodity trading scandals of the late 1980s in the U.S. Though public prosecutors suggested forbidding it, the public never understood the process. The politically powerful commodity exchanges, with their large contributions, blocked legislation against it. Dual trading should be banned because it represents a conflict of interest. If a broker holding a client's order to buy or sell is allowed to trade for his own account at the same price, or just in front of it to front-run it, as it is called on the exchanges, the market mechanism ceases to function in a fair manner, for the front-running broker has been given an unfair advantage over other market participants. For example, suppose a broker has an order to buy at a certain price. If he front-runs it before filling the order for his own account at or just above the order price, he then controls the client's order, which will buy it back from him, that is, protect his trade from a loss. The same holds true for selling in front of a client's sell order, selling or buying. Just knowing of the order's existence gives a big advantage. This is serious because with the members' margin requirements, so this is the cash deposit, being only about 1%, the front-running brokers have a possibility of great gain in short period with almost no possibility of loss. Since they only have to put 1% in, they won't lose anything if it's not in there. If a broker enters and exits the trade on the same day, the margin requirements are generally even lower than 1%. The client loses the opportunity to gain where his order is never filled, and the market rises or falls from his order point. Second, if the broker lets the order get filled because he can see that the market is going to go through with it anyway, the client's order is being filled in, obviously, to the broker, losing situation. Third, any market that systematically gives an advantage to particular participants over time will harm the relative position of all others. Some participants can trade with little or no risk. Over time, everyone else will be hurt. Some modern exchanges put limitations on brokers trading for their own accounts, but they're not always effective because the brokers use what are called bagmen, who they signal to do the offending trade, while they hold back the client's order to protect the accomplice's trading position and divide the profits later. Efforts made by the Amsterdam Stock Exchange to curb dual trading and front-running were not effective, as they have not been in modern times. Computerized trading, as opposed to an open outcry system, would largely solve this problem and perhaps introduce a different form of cheating by the computer literate. So, another form of manipulation on the stock market are bear ads. These are attempts to deliberately drive down in order to make money by short selling it. So, we have a description of this in 1688 from Joseph de la Vega, a Jewish stockbroker in Amsterdam, who wrote a book called Confusion of Confusions, vividly describing the exchange activity. He gave a detailed roadmap of how manipulators would launch a bear campaign to lower prices, and they outlined 12 strategies. So at the beginning of the campaign, the syndicate borrows all the money available at the exchange. They borrow as much money as they can, make it apparent it wishes to buy shares with this money. When they start their campaign to drive the price down, the bears actually begin with purchases which raise prices and take all items offered. So first they drive prices up as high as they can, artificially, before they start selling. So they strike the first blow with the time sales and the futures, reserving the cash sales for the moment of greater distress. Fifth strategy is to sell the largest possible number of options to I gotta look it up. To buy in the future. You're selling the right to buy in the future. And on the other hand, you're buying the largest possible quantity of put options, or the option to sell stock at a certain price at a certain future time without date or obligation. So 7, you loan the bulls money, taking their shares as collateral, and then you sell their shares. So after you've loaned the bulls money, taking their shares as collateral and selling their shares, this artificially drives the price up. 8, you start spreading false news. They drop a letter. They have a letter written and arranged to have the letter dropped as if by chance at the right spots. So they start making up rumors about the company or something in order to make the price drop. Then they'll get some person to sell and finance his loss, if any, in the belief that anything new gets more attention. 10, whisper loud enough to be heard. And then 12, sell government bonds to shock the general situation. So the manipulation of news is very important. The small boats, which were supposed to meet in the English ships and speed back to the harbor with news, in reality merely took a turn outside the harbor, and having invented their own plausible gossip, came back and sold it to the feverish crowd of speculators, wrote Wilson. So fake news, using rumors to make a company look like it's about to go out of business, was equally important in Amsterdam as it is now. So, an example of a bear raid. Companies can do bear raids on one another. There's an example of bear raids happening on within industries often. So different airline companies might get together on a rival airline company or something like that. Governments can do bear raids as well. So this is from BBC News. Russia planned Wall Street bear raid. So this is from an interview given by Hank Paulson, the former U.S. Treasury Secretary. The excerpts sort of depict a fascinating understanding between Washington and Moscow. So Mr. Paulson was talking about the financial crisis in the autumn of 2008, in particular the devastation of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two huge underwriters of American mortgages. Huge financial institutions that had a funny stats at the time being seen by investors to be a liability of the U.S. government, which isn't exactly true. But this is Mr. Paulson, former Treasury Secretary, talking. When Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac started to become unglued, there were 5.4 trillion of securities relating to Fannie and Freddie. 1.7 trillion outside of the U.S. held by the Chinese. The Chinese were the biggest external investor holding Fannie and Freddie securities, so the Chinese were very, very concerned. Or to put it another way, the Chinese government owned 1.7 trillion of mortgage-backed security bonds issued by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It was deeply concerned it would incur huge losses on those bonds if those banks collapsed. So Mr. Paulson said, I was talking to them, Chinese ministers and officials, regularly because I didn't want them to dump the securities on the market and precipitate a bigger crisis. And so when I went to Congress and asked for these emergency powers to stabilize Fannie and Freddie, and I was getting the living daylights beaten out of me by our Congress publicly, I needed to call the Chinese regularly to explain to the central bank, listen, this is our political system, this is political theater, we will get this done. And I didn't have quite that much certainty myself, but I sure did everything I could to reassure them. In other words, China had lent so much to the U.S. that Mr. Paulson needed to do his best to persuade its government and central bank that China's investment in all this U.S. debt would not be impaired, that China would get its money back. That their investment wasn't worth it. Mr. Paulson says, here I'm not going to name the senior person, but I was meeting with someone. This person told me that the Chinese had received a message from the Russians, which was, hey, let's join together and sell Fannie and Freddie securities on the market. The Chinese weren't going to do that, but again, it just drove home to me how vulnerable I felt until we had put Fannie and Freddie into a conservatorship, the rescue plan for them that was eventually put into place. So, the Chinese told Hank Paulson that the Russians were suggesting a joint pact with China to drive down the price of debt, Fannie and Freddie Mae securities, drive it down and make money off it. China would want to do that because they invested so much. But this would maximize the turmoil on Wall Street, and presumably with a view to maximizing the cost of a rescue for Washington for further damaging its political health. So this didn't happen, but Russia was trying to do this. This kind of intelligence from China on Russian desire and willingness to embarrass the U.S. in the financial sense may help to explain, in a small way, why President Obama showed little desire to work with Putin. And this is obviously a prelude to the cyber attack that we see the Russian on our elections. What's that? Wow, we're at 1 hour already. This is going way further. So part of the reason why China probably didn't want to short sell U.S. mortgage securities is because China is obviously big, not obviously, but China is apparently a big house of cards as well, according to George Soros, who compares China to the United States right before the 2008 financial crisis. China's debt load has reached 26.6 trillion as of 2015. 5 times what it was a decade ago. So China could have a lot of problems as well, and that would be huge because it's the second largest economy in the world, I believe. So back to Amsterdam, and we're pretty much done, or almost done with technical stuff on the market. One of the other things that we saw were the duck tunes. This was duck tune trading enabled a structural market flaw to fleece participants. These duck tunes were imaginary units, 1/10 of a Dust East India Company share. And they were kept as account book entries. So their market price fluctuated independently of the Dust East India Company shares, and they're settled monthly by the market maker. So the example to this today would be stock index future trading. And of course, with most future contracts, dates exchange goods for cash at some point. With a normal future settlement date, like say you're trading corn or something like that, you would engage in this contract because you're waiting for the corn to grow. So you're creating a contract for the future based on like production or something like that. The problem, however, is that most futures contracts aren't actually kept until expiration. Oftentimes, speculators don't exchange any money for the commodity. They just make money off price changes in the futures contract following their trade. So usually there's a big drop in the volume of a futures contract within days of the expiration date before money is actually meant to be paid. So there's a lot of turnover. The same type of riskless arbitrage was engaged in then as is now. The market makers in the duck tune would sell the duck tunes to speculators at a premium over the Dutch East India Company stock and purchase the underlying stock to guarantee a profit for themselves on expiration day. So they would sell these imaginary shares to people who would try to make money, and that would obviously give them a profit. Or what they would do too is they would buy duck tunes to these speculators, buy them for them at a discount, and at the same time sell short the DIC share. So they would buy the duck tunes essentially cheaper than they were paying for them. And in each case, they were cheating speculators. So there's no risk to the market maker for these duck tunes. He's just fleecing the public. And since these duck tunes settled for cash, these indices futures encourage speculators to manipulate the underlying share price. Trying to skip ahead and truncate the lecture a little bit. So, in modern commodity markets, the structural defect is unique to futures contracts settled in cash, primarily the stock indices and financials. For example, a corn futures contract wouldn't be so easily manipulated because the threat of those who were long corn futures might demand delivery of corn. Supplying corn on a particular date to fulfill the contract is a completely different matter than coming up with cash. Cash can always be borrowed in an emergency, allowing the manipulators wide leeway in their machinations. The duck tune was settled for cash, not the underlying DIC shares, making the duck tune the first known example of this type of structurally flawed futures investment, which have now been made even easier to manipulate the existence of cash-settled options on the futures. These types of contracts are primarily a gambling activity and could be outlawed with no loss to society, largely due to call options. And Investopedia also talks about how put options are a safer alternative to short selling. So these a lot of the speculation, the stock exchange in Amsterdam, completely useless, completely imaginary gambling activities. The actual economy of Amsterdam, as we point out, is based on fishing and warehousing and shipbuilding. And this gambling activity is what drains it. The same thing in our country. Actual agriculture, actual factory, actual manufacturing. But Wall Street, the stock exchange, just drains the actual wealth of this country. It sends it abroad in most instances. So, we talk about free market regulation and stuff like that. We're obviously for the Need Act, but we obviously need to talk about market regulation here as well. And so this financial war that we see actually culminates in actual war. There's this financial speculation. There's a major correlation here with this sort of activity in actual war. And so the fall of capitalism in Amsterdam was, of course, due to imperialism and to war with England, which drained the wealth of the city even more than speculation did. So the French from 1609 to 1667, the Dutch became more internationally oriented, creating a trading empire on the heels of the Portuguese decline. This brought them into conflict with the English, with whom they engaged in and off fighting from 1652, and this culminated in a humiliating experience when a big Dutch fleet went up the Thames River in 1667, which towed away many British warships down the Thames. As a result, there was a general peace in England from 1677. So this is the raid on Medway in 1677, successful Dutch attack on the largest English naval ships. These ships were laid out in dockyards, and the Dutch sailed up to the River Medway, and they burned 3 ships. They towed away 2 others from the English fleet. And this led to a favorable peace for the Dutch, worst defeat in the English Navy's history. 1672, the French invade Holland out of concern for her growing power. Bloom relates that the Jewish community offered the French 2 million guilders if they would spare the Jewish quarters of the city. However, Holland held a strategic advantage, the ability to flood sections of the country. Holland used her sea works and infrastructure to hold off France. So, during all this war and during all this speculation, we see the Dutch neglecting the real economy, the fishing, the shipbuilding, and the warehousing that led to their rise. And instead we see this concentration and gambling within the stock market, much like we see here in our country. And the development of a pervasive speculative psychology had bad effects on Amsterdam. While Christians were active speculators and the largest Dutch financiers were Christian, the Jews had concentrated their activities on the stock exchange, these unsworn free brokers. One of the most important developments in the 18th century is the way in which Jews came to dominate the brokers' guild. Portuguese Jewry had completely forsaken trade in order to take up gambling on the share market, wrote Wilson. So, a few merchants can still remember the days when the city was every day strewn with casks and bales of merchandise, humming with war people. Now grass grows there, so to speak, and among the whole population of Portuguese Jews, there's not so much commercial activity. Could a more opposite picture be painted of the grievous effects of share gambling on a people, wrote de Koopman. Bank of Amsterdam's monopoly on money changing and banking had effectively stopped the manipulation of Holland's medium of exchange. So the public bank stopped money changing games in the city. However, the stock exchange became a great mechanism of international finance with its accumulation of capital and relatively efficient operation. Foreign governments, especially England, were able to float loans there in Amsterdam at half the interest rate that was possible at home. According to Barbaro, the Dutch were actually forbidden by the government to loan to foreign powers or invest in foreign companies, but they ignored the law. It was not just the money classes that participated for the first time. Ordinary citizens, as distinct from professional financiers, have been drawn into international finance on a large scale, neglecting local industry. And cosmopolitanism has harmed England, according to Zarlenga. This over-specialization in international finance led to a developing cosmopolitan outlook, which led to a disregard by the richest Dutch for their own society and their fellow Dutchmen. This led to an increased concentration of wealth in the hands of a small group of people, and a certain disassociation from national domestic interests. The interests of these groups was often closely bound up with those of foreign countries, as with the Republic. There was a growth of large-scale structural unemployment. After 1715, the Republic ceased to play any role of significance in European affairs. Dominant groups of Dutch politics preferred to accept the fall in international influence of the Republic rather than embark on reforms which would have undermined their vested interests. Sound familiar? The tax system placed the burden on those least able to support it, and the resources of the wealthier sections of society were hardly tapped at all. So there's an attempted revolt in 1780 which failed, and so we see the rise of this parasitic investor class, just like we're seeing now. So, of course, the Dutch East India Company fell. They overreached with their colonialism by skip that slide. So, along with this cosmopolitanism, this neglect of internal infrastructure, we see the wealthy elites of Holland financing England. So Dutch loans were indispensable to the government of England from 1680 to 1780. Dutch money was important and even indispensable to the British government, roughly from years of 17th century to 1780. So instead of the Dutch investing in their own country, they're investing in England. And the biggest Dutch financiers were Christians and bill brokering. The Jews made more political loans, such as that to the Dutch House of Orange's William III to enable him to become the King of England. Everywhere, about 1/3 of British national debt was held in Holland, paying £1.4 million annual interest. So after the Dutch beat England, they started investing in it. They beat them, and they started making lots of loans to them. So, migration to London of a small but important group of Dutch traders and financiers, Christian and Jew together with Huguenots, French Protestants, who came via Holland, rivaled the Jews in their cosmopolitan financial competence. The system of government finance, which was modeled on Dutch pattern, in the process not of a few Dutch hands were employed. Now we begin to encounter the names of some of the famous Portuguese Jewish families who had taken refuge in Holland a century earlier, the Medinas, the Suassus, and the Pintos, as well as the Dutch Christian names, Van Neckers, Van Nattens, Van Hemmerts, or Wilson. Was not the Bank of England floated with Dutch capital, and were not the Dutch bankers still among its largest stockholders and customers in the 1760s. So we also see Dutch financing the United States. By 1780, the Dutch held 3.7% of the English national debt. However, as a result of England's war with the American colonies, they began shifting money from England to France and America. So again, we see bankers funding both sides of a war, the American War for Independence. The Bank of England, of course, was financed by the Dutch now, but once the Americans, the colonists, start to revolt, the Dutch start financing them and France. They loaned 29 million guilders to America between 1782 and 1790. In 1785, there was a heavy selling of British securities on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, all of which probably contributed to American success. By June 1802, American securities topped the most active list on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, and in January 1818, Holland held almost as much American loans as the British did. So, we see the spread, again, of capitalism. We see the bankers basically depleting their own country, shifting to England, and from England coming over to the colonies. So to summarize, under a sense of dominance of Northern Europe, Holland took control of the Cape route to East, including the gold-silver trade. A key internal engine of development was this public bank of Amsterdam, which stabilized the monetary system, allowed trade to flourish. This was a city-owned and run institution. It removed the temptation to molest the money supply, encouraging merchants to engage in more productive activities. The bank's high reputation demonstrated the ability of public officials to professionally manage the money system. Though based on gold and silver, the bank money it provided was more abstract form than coinage, and that further helped trade and industry. The bank generally separated money from credit. When it failed to do so, as it did with the Dutch East India Company, its defining feature as a public institution facilitated its rescue. The bank found it necessary to create credits for the Dutch East India Company, even though gold and silver poured into Holland into unprecedented amounts from the plundered Americans, strongly indicates the inadequacy of precious metals using gold or silver as money. So the Jews were relatively welcomed in Holland, but were banned from banking. They weren't allowed to be sworn brokers, so they sort of set up this alternative free brokerage system with the stock exchange. Some were involved in what turned out to be a deeply political form of publishing. Many others often became influential on the great Amsterdam Stock Exchange. There we saw the development of the same instruments and problems that we see today with options markets. So the stock exchange basically took Dutch away from industry, just the same way Wall Street's taking the workers in the United States away from industry. Okay. For this lecture, and this sets us up to start talking about the transfer of capitalism from Amsterdam to England, the rise of the British Empire, which of course will set us up to talk about the American War for Independence from that empire. So has anyone been saying anything? It's been going off for a while here.
Yeah. Warren and Will have been with us.
Cool.
Warren was closing off asking who should control the issue and emission of fiat currency. I think as you were closing up on the stock market.
I agree with Zarlenga that there should be a monetary authority, Section 510 of the bill, I believe, which sets up a monetary authority to monitor the amount of money that's needed in society and distribute that and monitor the effects of that. So as long as it's held publicly accountable, I think it should be done. The Treasury should have like a real time website showing where money is being distributed in real time. Personally,
That's interesting.
so yeah.
Would that include also votes from the public as to where they want the money being distributed, or is that too much?
I think that's not included in there. I mean, like talking about how we actually get this done. It should. I mean, the way that the monetary authority gets set up in the Need Act is that the president chooses people bilateral. So it's sort of like a Supreme Court decision. A lot of people don't like this part of the Need Act because they think it gives too much power to those people. I think it gives a lot of responsibility to them. I mean, it forces a responsibility onto them. I don't see it necessarily as a powerful position as much as it's clerkship. So I mean, this would force Congress to do its budgeting better. So presumably Congress would be working with the monetary authority to determine the budget, and then the monetary authority would be distributing, or the Treasury would be distributing the amount of money the monetary authority tells them to via the nationalized Federal Reserve. And there's no reason why that money couldn't be distributed with blockchain technology, so that we're kind of bypassing the need for these bigger banks like Wells Fargo and Bank of America and all that altogether. So
Interesting.
yeah, I hope all this stuff sort of made sense. Talking about the market and stuff really interests me. I want to get more and more into that. I'm a big Investopedia fan now. And so just to close out again, I'm going to upload this lecture onto YouTube. Please leave comments or questions in there. Spread it around. Please check out our solution, the Need Act. We're not doing this for nothing. We're doing this for money. We need your hard-earned money to help keep this going. If you can, please, please, please donate. Or if you can't donate, please share this out and tell other people too. And stay tuned, because I'm going to start a new project. We're going to use your donations to set up a new news broadcast, hopefully every Monday night. Something a little bit easier to digest, something a little bit more of a weekly format. We're going to keep doing this, of course. We're going to finish the book. We've got about 15 more chapters to do. And I'm going to keep doing these lectures with Natalie. I'm going to keep teaching martial arts in front of the Federal Reserve as well. It's just that these projects take a little too much coordination from other people. I kind of need something a little bit more simple and to the point that I can do each week. So that's what your donations are going to be supporting if you throw some cash at us. So thanks a lot. We're gonna keep on this until we don't have any money problems anymore.
Cool. Looking forward to that.